Anyway, we're going to get started and talk a little bit about what you need to know about the IT job market and what you need to know from the IBM perspective as to where the market's going, what can you do to stay on top of the field and keep yourself gainfully employed. Okay, so with that, we'll get started. And let's see. Oh, Eamon, I think I need some help here. I'm not advancing.
Yeah, sorry. No, it should work.
Sorry, a little technical difficulty here. So some of the things you really need to be aware of, regardless of what your field or specialty is. But if you're involved in technology, you do need to know something about the economy, what's happening, business news. Be aware of things like that. Technology. Well, we're all walking around with a computer in our pocket for the most part, or a purse. We're all involved with technology, and it's changing all the time. From things like, even a TV connection. My TVs at home are now wireless. I don't even need a cable box on my TV, and I can watch Amazon, Netflix, things like that. I'm amazed myself, even though I'm involved with some technical stuff, some of the things that are baffling to me, and you've got to study them and try to find out about them. In our field, you really need to be concerned about keeping your skills up to date as far as modernized programming, how your company can benefit from some of the new tools out there. I see a lot of shops that are afraid to touch anything. They say if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. That's the wrong idea, the wrong way to go about a successful career. We're going to talk a little bit about professional worth. What are you worth, and how do you increase your worth? What can you do to make yourself a hot commodity in the job search market? We're also going to talk about embracing change, and that's really the theme of my talk every year is embracing change, how to keep up with things. And then we're going to talk, if we have time, a little bit, we're going to touch on resumes and interview processes. Interviewing and job search has really changed in the last 20 years. It's no longer, you look at a newspaper, it's no longer a big want ad section. Everything is online. Everything is electronic. You don't mail your resume. You don't show up in person anymore. It's a whole different world. Some of the things that are good news and some things to be aware of all the time, even though you're focused on technology, what is the economy doing? Right now, we're actually in a great mode where unemployment has been staying at about 4.4, 4.3%. And that's pretty much the rule of what's been happening in California as well. A far cry from when it was 9.8, 10.2, just a few short years ago when we went through that crisis back in 2008, 2009, and so forth. So we're humming along really great right now. The job numbers, you hear about jobs created. What does that mean? Well, I get I guess, focused on these kind of numbers, this kind of news. I watch business news every day, so I'm always looking for jobs created, what's happening with that. And we should be creating about 200 to 225,000 jobs a month. And what that means is new jobs that are created. Our population is growing. And as our population is growing, we have to create more jobs. So it's not that somebody got laid off and then another job was created. These are absolutely new jobs that we're looking at. In August, our numbers were 156,000 jobs, which was not that great. The average for 2017 was about 176,000. For a long period of time, I would say about 3-4 years ago, we were averaging probably about 150,000 jobs. And that's why so many people were unemployed, looking for jobs and not finding jobs. Another important number is the GDP, gross domestic national product. And that's kind of another measuring stick of how our economy is doing. When the GDP is doing good, everybody's gainfully employed, incomes are going up, people can buy houses, things like that. So we've actually picked up, about the last 6 years, we've been running about 2%, 2.2%. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now, but for this year so far, we've actually picked up to 3%, which is not bad. And if we can be at 3% to 4% in our economy, that means things are just humming along great. Stock market is another indicator. Okay, I don't know if anybody saw the stock market today. Might know what the stock market did today. Anybody? Yeah, it was up. It was up again. Another record. There were five. When I did this yesterday, there were 5 record days in a row. Today it went up again about to I think it was 22 370 something, about another 40 points up. So the stock market is just rock and rolling. Boy, if you haven't gotten in on the stock market, I still think there's plenty of time to get in on it and watch this grow, because it looks like our economy is going to stay this course for a good while. Typically, we have recessions about every 7 or 8 years, and we've been going strong a lot longer than that. So this is actually really good news. But at some point, there's going to be a drop off. And these indicators that we're talking about, these are the indicators that are going to tell you, tighten your belt, hold on tight. The ride's going to get a little bumpy. Okay, so that's why these different indicators are extremely important to be aware of. Federal Reserve raising interest rates. When they raise interest rates, it's actually a good thing. Right now, it's a good thing, because that means there's confidence in the economy going forward. So, if I'm going to put money in the stock market, that's a good thing to do right now. If I'm going to start a business, that's a good thing to do, because the economy is humming along. When these things turn around the other direction, that's when you want to kind of build up your little fortress and kind of sit tight and ride it out, and be prepared to ride it out. Okay, and of course, watching business news. Again, I'm a fanatic, so this is what I do all day long. I do work in recruiting, but I've got the TV on in the background, and I'm watching the stock market, or I'm listening to different bits and pieces about Amazon buying Whole Foods, or Target sales going up or down, or some transaction that's going to affect the economy. So I want to keep up on that kind of stuff. And these are the things that you just pick up a little bit here and there, and you're understanding the economy and where things are going. Okay. Some of the things that have impacted our world in the last 10, 15 years, we can go back further, but there's too many inventions. But just in the last 10 or so years, we've got the iPhone. Now we're up to iPhone 10. Samsung and iPhone, it doesn't matter which one you have. They're both phenomenal. And they keep, piggybacking or jumping over each other. So it's, a sign of the times of how important that little device is. That's where, Apple's making their money, is off that iPhone. Samsung, well, they make a lot of other things too, like refrigerators and TVs and what have you. But these companies are just doing phenomenal with these new technological gadgets. Banking. I don't know how many of you have written, a check for paying a bill lately, but I'd say, like myself, typical people are probably doing all their payments electronically. There's no need to worry about writing a check, putting a stamp on it. Just have it on automatic payment. So we've changed the way banking is being done. You look at the banks and you see all these teller booths, and you see one person there, 2 people. I went into one bank, actually a Chase Bank near me, and there were no tellers. And there's just all these automated kiosks. And it's like, do you have your debit card? And it's like, no, I don't have my debit card. Oh, okay. Well, we can still help you. So somebody took my check and took my deposit. I personally still like talking to a banker. Okay. But text messaging, social media, social contacts, these are things that are the way of life today, and this is important to embrace it. There are times when you want to just put your phone away, but I think there are times when you really need to be in touch with somebody, or you need to get a message. Now you can text them. You don't have to email them. You don't have to send them a letter. You don't have to give them a phone call. So we're relying on these new forms of communication that are extremely important. Our medical information, newspapers. Newspapers are vanishing. I stopped my subscription to the Register because I got frustrated with just no business news. They started taking out more and more business news, and that's really the reason I was getting my newspaper. So I subscribed again, and I get this thin little newspaper, and I look at it, business section. Well, there's like maybe 3 articles, 4 articles, and that's it. The sports section is pretty big. If that's what you want to do is look at the sports. But pretty much everything in the newspaper is it's about that thick now, and it's really changed. Now we get our news on the internet. We get it through social media. We get it through TV. Anything that's in the newspaper was probably on TV yesterday or the day before. Another thing that's happening too with the new paradigm of shopping, like Amazon, is that malls are beginning to disappear, or you might say have to rethink themselves. There's a couple of malls. There's one by me at Laguna Hills where that was the mall, okay? And now they've torn that mall down and they're going to make it into an outdoor mall to try to attract different kinds of restaurants and, you might say a younger crowd of shoppers. But they're not going to have the big malls. They're not going to have a Macy's at every single shopping mall. They're going to be spread out. So you'll read about stores closing, some of the things that are changing. Um, Uber. Uber wasn't around a few years ago. Uber, Lyft, Google's automated cars and automated trucks, radar on buses that can prevent accidents, self-parking cars. I mean, all of this stuff wasn't around 20 years ago. We weren't even thinking about it. I remember as a kid, and I won't tell you how long ago it was, but we used to get a Popular Mechanics magazine, and they showed a picture, and I'll never forget it. I wish I had that magazine, of a car with a family of 4, and they're all turned around in swivel seats like you are, and they're playing a board game as their car is traveling down the freeway on some magnetic track. And it's like, how far-fetched is that? It's not far-fetched anymore. It's actually here, okay? Does anybody have a self-driving car yet? No? Anybody? Okay, I've heard a story from our friend Narupa. Her husband has a Tesla, and she's deathly afraid of when he takes his hands off the wheels. But like I said, it's here, and it's happening, and it's the real world. So just like these things have changed, job searches change, skills are changing constantly to basically help facilitate all of these new technologies that are coming out. The cloud, we didn't know what the cloud was 10, 15 years ago. I read an article about Amazon and how they got into the cloud, and it was really ingenious, and it was somebody who was not quite an intern, but kind of somebody there on a special project, and brought this idea to Jeff Bezos that, hey, we could do this with the cloud. And he said, go for it. And he gave him the money to start this expansion. Next thing you know, Amazon Cloud Service is one of the biggest cloud services in the world. And a lot of companies are using it. And Amazon making tons of money off of it. Okay. Cyber attacks. Has anybody been attacked with their credit card information? Any of this incident that happened this week or previous? It seems like every year there's another major security breach, cyber attack. And no matter what we do, something else will surpass that the next year. So there's going to be a lot of demand for people with security knowledge. What you do in your own shop. If you ever wanted to change careers and specialize in security, you got a phenomenal future ahead of you. Some of the things in looking at this presentation, what could affect our jobs? And it could be a lot of things, but one of them, which everybody says, no, that could never happen. Could RPG ever be replaced? Maybe it can, maybe it can't. I don't know, but I will bet that it probably could be. Okay. Now, with COBOL, we thought COBOL was going to be dead, but COBOL is still there in the background. But there's other tools that are accessing all that COBOL legacy code. Too many lines of code to rewrite. Okay, another idea for you. artificial intelligence. There's a company that is actually writing code from scratch using artificial intelligence. They're doing it in Java, and they're taking on companies that have a special need, and they are developing systems for that company. Could they do that with RPG? Could artificial intelligence and automation replace RPG programmers? One of the things about RPG or the IBM one of its, I think it's a problem actually. The IBM is so good, you don't need that many people to run it or to program it. You can buy ERP software. A little story I was telling somebody earlier. Uh, I once did an article on how many programmers does it take to screw in a light bulb. At that time, I had a client who was Fox Television, and they were running 12 IBM I's spread out around the country. Okay, and they were running JD Edwards. They had an IT director, they had a systems analyst, a systems administrator, and one JD Edwards person, and that was it. And I asked him, I said, Alex, how do you do this with just that small of a staff? He goes, I don't let the users change anything. He goes, all the code is native. He goes, so we don't have to maintain it. And then I talked to another company like Fedco Stores, and all their program stuff is written from scratch. And they've got about 50 people in the IT department. They rewrite their code every 7 years, which is, I guess, how it was done in a lot of mainframe shops. And because hardware changes, you had to rewrite the code. With the IBM you don't have to rewrite the code. You can use it the way it is, um, with some limitations, of course. But the thing is, every shop is different in how they do things. And is it possible that something can come out that's going to replace the need for RPG? Or maybe you're going to have to change, what your RPG programmers are doing. Maybe they're going to have to be doing more stuff with open source, things like that. So anyway, I want to move along here, but again, mergers, acquisitions, companies relocating out of state. We know a few people right now in our group where the company's relocating, and it's like everybody's getting laid off, or they're getting a termination date to stay on to a certain date, and that's it. Your job is done. Uh, Virtual hardware and software environments are becoming increasingly popular. Let's see, as far as trends, we're lucky that we're in technology because that is one of the best fields to be in. We've got one of the lowest unemployment numbers of any industry out there. Okay, still the best tools right now are Java, C, a few other open source languages, but you can see the trends as we'll get into this a little deeper in a little bit. Companies I found over the last few years, maybe 10, 15 years, are getting more and more narrow as to what they will accept to get an interview. It used to be that if you could say RPG, you got hired. If you just had a good personality, a nice person, you had some good basic skills, and the chemistry was there, you got hired. That's not the way anymore. Now you have to have exactly what they're looking for. If the company is in a certain industry, they may want that particular industry. If they're using a certain software, well, you need to be have that same release, updated release of that software. Otherwise, you're not interested. Even if you're a release or two back, they're going to say, well, that's not what we want. We want to keep looking for people. So some employers are making it really, really tough to get in the door of a company. Another fact we have, some of the jobs I've worked on in the last couple of years, programmer died, programmer retired, programmers retiring in 6 months or a year. Okay, these are the kinds of openings that we get. We always ask them, how did the opening come up? Is it an expansion? Is it a replacement? Did somebody leave? And it's, for the most part, it's people retiring. Okay, so that's become a real dilemma, especially in the IBM arena. I've had several needs in the last few years that have ended up being part-time jobs, and that's what companies wanted, that's what they needed, and sometimes that's what you have to accept. I've actually had a couple of people that preferred part-time jobs because maybe they were a consultant and they had one or two other gigs going on at the same time. And they said, really, I've got 20 hours available. If you can find me a job where I can work 20 hours a week. And some of those things have worked terrific. So there is a trend of more and more part-time work out there. Um, Offshore, we hear about offshore all the time. And, every day in my inbox, I probably get about, I'm going to say about 10 offers of offshore companies that want to see if they can fill my jobs with their people. Um, it's the reality is there, and there's probably, well, one number I got through Dice that I had to read it and I couldn't believe it, but Dice estimates, and this is about 3 or 4 years old, this article, about 800,000 H-1B people have come through here. Typically in a year, there's probably over 100,000 H-1B people that come into our country, to do jobs that they say we're not qualified for. I don't know how we're not qualified, but again, part of it has to do with companies insisting that you have the exact experience that they're looking for. And is there any RPG programmer who could not learn RPG 3 from RPG 2? The answer is no. Anybody could learn it, just given the opportunity. Could you learn JD Edwards? Could you learn BPIX? Can you learn Mapix? Of course you could learn it, just given the opportunity. Today, in today's world, companies don't want to give you that opportunity to learn something or transition your skills, for the most part. And I think they're making a big, big, big mistake. But that's part of the compounding, the dilemma that we have out there. Uh, the types of jobs, I just put this chart up here from Computer World. There's a lot of magazines and studies out there. They're pretty much, about the same type of numbers. Application programming is always going to be good. Project management is always good. Analytics, big data, cloud, things like that. They're all pretty strong areas, okay? So if you ever found yourself with an opportunity to segue into one of these areas, I think it's going to be a good move for you. Something I picked up from a survey in IBM magazine. I know you can't all see it here, but hopefully everybody gets the magazine. It's free from IBM. You can get a hard copy or you can get the soft copy. But it's IBM Systems Magazine for IBM I. And they did a readership survey, and you can see from the chart here, there are several analytics that they pulled from this survey. The one I was most interested in is looking at what shops are using for programming languages. And yes, RPG is up there, number one, but Java is right behind it. Okay, and this is telling you a little bit of a story. .NET is right behind that. C++ is right behind that. So if you want to move along in your career, these are some of the things you want to make yourself available to, either by taking a class in it or maybe even getting your manager to commit to doing a project using one of these newer tools. Maybe you bring in a software package that gives you the opportunity to work with one of these tools. One of the other, I'll show you here in a minute, but here's where RPG is going, and it's been going for quite a while. And if you've been around in the field, you probably know some of this, but again, I think seeing the numbers gives you a glaring example of where things are headed. Programming languages, Java, C, C++ have remained at the top of the heap. RPG programming used to be one of the top 10 languages at one time. It's fallen now for the last few years, and actually there's been a couple times when it's been lower than 50, like 52, and you can't even find a chart as to where it rates. But this website, this Tyobe website, they put this together every year, and it's based on not actually physically taking a survey of companies, but they use some metrics, some automated metrics for searches that are used on, let's say, somebody searching for something on Java for somebody searching for something with RPG. And the numbers of searches they feel is an indicator, and I say they feel, they're statisticians and and so forth, know a lot more than me, but basically they are saying that based on these searches, this is how they rank the different programming languages. And they do this ranking every year. So, again, RPG has really kind of fallen out of favor. But there's a little more to the story, okay? And we're gonna get into that in just a minute here, a slide or two up from here. Uh, One of the other things that I always like to do is let people know where the jobs are. I've been doing this now for, I'm going to say probably 50, no, more than 15 years, probably close to 20 years now. I've been tracking job numbers on DICE. And I use that because DICE is really geared more to technical jobs and programming as opposed to Monster and Career Builder, which, do, accounting, insurance, sales, pretty much everything else. So I've been tracking the numbers, and obviously I'm not putting in every single year because I don't have enough space, but I think you can get the idea. You can see where the trends are going. For every RPG job that there's out there are over 100 jobs for Java, 100 jobs for C, 100 jobs for .NET, any other discipline. So we're a small piece of the pie. And when I look at these job numbers, and people say, yeah, but I know, I have a client of mine that's looking for RPG programmer. Well, yes, they are hard to find because there's not that many out there. And I want to show you why. I did a search to see how many resumes were out there for each discipline, each of the main disciplines. Okay. On DICE, I found 3,100 resumes for RPG. I found 73,000 for Java. I found 30,000 for .NET. If I'm going to put in a new system and I look at RPG, or I look at IBM system and what they offer, and I look at another company and what they offer. Now, yes, you're supposed to look at software first and then decide what platform you're going to put it on. But one of the things that I keep running into is companies saying, where are we going to find RPG programmers in the future? That's why we want to get off the platform. And this tells you the story, okay? Where are the RPG programmers going to come from? Well, they're not coming from RPG classes. They're going to come from probably PHP, Java, C students, and I'm going to, let's face it, young people, okay? So if you want to, keep uh, doing programming, you're going to have to learn some of these new languages as well. But that is one of the dilemmas for anybody looking at an IBM I system and the future is there's a shortage of IBM I people, and it's worse than a shortage. I mean, we're a minuscule speck compared to the rest of the world. When you look at Oracle, you look at Java, .NET, whatever, that's the reality. And I think that is hurting the IBM I platform. And by the way, I just want to say, I love the IBM I platform. I love this section of the IT or segment of the IT marketplace out there. And it really kills me to have to bring this kind of news to anybody. But this is the reality. We've got one of the best systems in the world, but we don't have the resources. And we have a lot of people that they learned RPG 2, then they learned RPG 3. They stopped learning. Maybe they learned ILE, okay, but then they stopped and they're dropping off. They're not learning anymore. So this is something that's really, hurting the IBM I platform. One of the again, looking at this statistic of one job per 100 for Java and C, yeah, one of the obvious, counterpoints is that some of the biggest companies in America, or the world for that matter, are using the IBM I, and they're committed to the IBM I. Companies like, Johnson & Johnson, Starbucks, Costco, I mean, they're doing other things too, and there isn't a single IBM shop that isn't also running a Windows platform or some other software or language and so on. So it gets a little convoluted, but the thing is, you look at some of these companies, the B of A, the Wells Fargo, the New York Mellon, Bank of New York Mellon, you know, these are companies that really are into the IBMI. Casinos, for the most part, casinos, that's a given. You're running it on an IBMI, okay? So there is some hope there, but the thing is, there's still a lot of small companies that don't have the luxury of a big staff, or maybe don't have the manager who is really pushing for any new development, new technology, you know, modernizing new products, maybe taking a whole new approach and keeping that IBMI and keeping the RPG legacy that's in the background there. Just finding new ways to you know, to utilize that and you might say ensure that that investment that they've already made. So again, part of my theme here tonight is going to be that you got to be doing more than just RPG. Um, and think about this, okay? You're a programmer analyst. You know how an inventory system works. You know how a distribution system, or you know how the financials work. Why can't you write it in another language, or have the back end in RPG, but have the front end in something like .NET or Java or some other tool, because you know that system. So don't limit yourself with just, well, I'm just an RPG programmer. You have to be more than an RPG programmer in this world, okay? And again, you add some new skills to your background, and you're going to earn money. You're also going to be in demand. People are going to be seeking you out instead of you knocking on doors trying to get an interview. Some of the key things that I think you have to have today, the primary skills, besides the ILE RPG, you've got to have freeform. You got to have SQL, embedded SQL. You got to know something about JavaScript. You've got to know things like RDI. This is what's happening now, and if you're fighting it, stop resisting. You got to let go of the old school way of doing things, and you got to start bringing the modern tools into play. Um, you know, XML, JSON, you know, web services, the open access, learning to write open access handlers. I'm not a programmer, but I've listened to some sessions on how to do JavaScript. I understood what they're talking about. Okay, so if I can understand it, I know you can. HTML, I didn't know what HTML was until one day I picked up a magazine for about $4 and I wrote the first Ocean website. And it was plain old HTML. And it's like, this is nothing. And some people in Ocean were saying, wow, you should give a talk on that. I go, it's nothing compared to what you guys do. But if you take the time to sit down and play around with something and you say, now I get it, now I see how this works, well, maybe there's a place for you to use that someplace, you know, at your company. So this is how you kind of, you might say, nudge yourself into that sweet spot of expanding your skills. Today, if you don't have these primary skills, it's pretty much a prerequisite to get an interview. The secondary skills sometimes also become critical in deciding whether or not you're going to get an interview. The pluses, that's what makes you stand out from the crowd. That's where you start earning 10 to 15 to maybe 20% more than your colleagues without that type of skill. So these are some things that I just wanted to bring forth for you to think about. And you know, next time you hear somebody mention something like WordPress, find out what it's about. There are companies that are using WordPress for their website with their IBMI. How do you bring those two together? How can you say, hey, I know a little bit about WordPress, give me a chance to do it, because I know the RPG backend and I know how to get all that information. This question is RPG dead has been tossed around for a long time. I've heard some real ugly arguments back and forth about it, and I hear it once in a while too. Is RPG going to be around? RPG is going to be around just like COBOL's been around. Okay, that's pretty much a given. There's a lot of code written in RPG, and nobody's going to throw that out, the baby with the bathwater. Okay, so the thing is, you really need to be able to adapt to some of the new skills that are going to interact with the RPG. And a couple things I just wanted to mention here too, as far as how big IBMI is in RPG. Um, and this is part of the problem. We're not as big as a lot of people think, but we're in a lot of big companies, okay? But it's still a very small segment of the market. And if you think that there's, the numbers I've heard tossed around are about 150 to 175,000 IBMI installations. All right, if there's a 150 to 175,000 IBMI installations, there's probably about 15 million Intel servers, Unix servers, and everything else that's out there. So, we're a small segment of the market, but that doesn't mean that you can't excel in that in your marketplace. And there's still a lot of room for improvement. The problem is there's a lot of people that are too lazy to learn, too lazy to to push hard for it, to champion the modernization features. I mean, I've heard some companies say that, yeah, we talked to a company that said they could do this, but we didn't want to spend 10 million. No, so they go to Oracle, and what do they spend? 15 million, and they hate it. I have a company that called me recently from Detroit. The CEO called me. I don't usually get a call from the CEO, and they said it seems like you know or understand the IBMI and the RPG market. And he goes, let me tell you what our situation is. We're a small manufacturing company, privately held. And he goes, and 2 years ago we went to Oracle. He goes, and we've spent probably about 3 million on it already, and they're telling me it's going to take about another 2 million to finish the job. He goes, our users hate it. He goes, I hate it, and he goes, we're ready to just write it off as a lost cause and go back to the IBMI and RPG. And his concern was, how do I find RPG programmers and in the future? And I told him about Jim Buck and his school, and I told him about the opportunity to train Java. Actually, he'd heard about this from another manager as well, and he wanted to know if it was true that you can take somebody with Java or C experience and cross train them in RPG, and you definitely can. And I know a couple of shops that have done that, but very, very few, unfortunately. There's an opportunity, but you have to have your code upgraded to at least a RPG freeform, and then it becomes easy to take a C programmer or Java programmer and show them how RPG works, because now they get it. It's just another language to them. And these kids coming out of school, it's nothing for them to work with 5 or 6 different languages at the same time. Okay? They look at whatever the best tool is to get that particular project done. So it is possible to do. RPG will be around for a long time, and but in order for it to survive, companies need to take the steps to update it, modernize it, and, uh, and basically support their staff. And part of it is in bringing in additional help. I would say the average shop that I talk to is probably understaffed by 1 to 1.5 people easily, and that's their reason why they don't have time or resources to to do their updates. Um, some of the differences between IBMI and the rest of the world in salary is pretty evident as well. I've been tracking salaries now since 1980 in the RPG market. And I don't go by a specific survey that I send out. I tried doing that. It doesn't work. I go based on what I see people making and what companies are offering. It's kind of like real estate. If you know a certain market, you know what a house should go for. Um, in the non-IBM market, I relied on Robert Half's salary survey, and I pulled some of the same positions and looked at the salaries. In general, the salaries are typically 10 to 20% higher than the RPG market, and that is your fault. You're not demanding enough. You're not, you might say, making yourself that more valuable. And your managers, they need to recognize, in order to keep good talent, they've really got to reward that person, the personnel. There's a couple of key areas, though, that are really, anomalies, but also a sign of where things are headed. I had a company in Dallas call me this year, and they were looking for a couple of PHP people with IBM I experience. One had to be a top-notch PHP person, new web services, Apache server, a lot of different tools. And the other one, somebody who was RPG but was getting into PHP. Those positions were paying up to 140, even 145,000. And I go, why? I want to make sure I heard him right. He goes, yeah. He goes, if you could find me the right talent, he goes, we're willing to pay for that person. And I go, plus pay relocation, plus great benefits. So why are you doing just RPG3 or ILE? Why aren't you learning PHP? Why aren't you learning .NET, SQL, even SQL Server, some of these other databases and web services that are out there? You don't have to know everything, but have a couple of things that you can say, well, I know this tool. I know this open source tool. I've used .NET, or I've used Ruby. I've used Python. I know HTML. I've written reports with SQL, and I know all the ins and outs of SQL. These are the people that are going to make the money. And you can be there, but you got to do a little work to get there. Keeping up, it's not easy, but it's something you have to constantly do, because technology is changing all the time. And, again, some of the things that you must do, if you're not doing them already, you got to be doing RPG freeform. You got to be doing the RDI. You got to be doing the SQL. You've got to learn how to work with web services. Some of these things that we've talked about, things that we cover in Ocean. The idea of Ocean, or any user group for that matter, is to get an overview of a topic, not to make you an expert. We're not going to do a 6-month class in SQL. But the thing is, over 6 months, there might be a touch of SQL, a touch of PHP, a touch of Apache server, things like that. And maybe that's enough to ignite the spark that you go do some research on your own. All of these tools are not impossible to learn. You don't have to have a 4-year degree in PHP to be proficient at it. But just play around, do a little project, do a little thing that you can show to your boss as to, hey, I accomplished this with PHP, and it doesn't take hardly any memory to run. We're able to interface with our website, things like that. So, show people in your shop that there are better ways to do things, still maintaining that background of the RPG legacy, but interfacing it with the new tools. Again, change. This is what this whole thing is about, is change. You've got to learn how to adapt, how to, do a little bit more to, you might say, go with the flow of what's happening in our industry. It's not the same industry that it was back in 1980 or 1990. It's changed a lot, okay? Some of the things, if your company were to move to SAP and they're willing to train you, look at it as an opportunity. SAP programmers are extremely paid well. If your company says, well, we're going to be cutting staff, and I'm sorry, you're going to be the first person we're going to have to cut back, ask them if you can contract back on a part-time basis, and bring it up to them, because you have this knowledge. You wrote this system, and maybe you can still keep working on it. So there might be an opportunity that way. Consider the possibility of contract programming. even though contract programming is not what it used to be back in the 80s and 90s. Then contract programming was born because of this overwhelming need to bring RPG 3 to shops that had been RPG 2. And literally, you can go someplace for 6 months, go to another job, stay there for 6 months, go to another job, and every time you got 10 or 15% increase. That's not happening anymore. It is tough finding contracts, but on the same token, companies are using more and more contractors. That's where all these H-1Bs are coming in. Okay, companies want to bring people in for a project, get it done, cut the expense, push them out the door. When we get the next project, bring the next group of contractors in. It is touch and go, and it's not real easy to survive if you're just RPG. But if you're RPG and PHP and RPG and SQL Server, .NET, or some of these other tools, believe me, you're going to have people pulling at you from all different directions. And so you can make a career out of consulting in that perspective. Okay? If you're a JD Edwards expert or a BPIX or a MAPIX expert, capitalize on that, because now find out who are the shops that are using that ERP and maybe contract back to them or offer to support them on a part-time basis or a remote basis, things like that. If there's a 3-month project or a 6-month project out of town, hey, if they're willing to pay your expenses and pay a good rate, go for it. Okay, I mean, maybe you have to worry about somebody taking care of your pet, but if you can do that and maybe come home on weekends or commute, I know a few people that commuted to Northern California for a long time basis, and they love it. They love it. They made extra money and they were still home on the weekends. So be open to those possibilities. Okay, your resume. We're gonna touch on this here a little bit, and we'll try and wrap up within the next 15 minutes. All right, your resume is critical. It really is important. Resumes have gone from crude to too polished, and they got to be somewhere in between. There's no one particular resume format that is everybody's got to be using this. Everybody's resume is a little bit different, but remember, your resume has got to tell a story about who you are, what your skills are, and you've got to hit them between the eyes with, I always say, the first half page. If they're not interested after reading the first top of the page, then they're probably not going to read the second page. So you got to create that interest in the top part of the page. There's some basics about resumes that I believe in, and things like, for example, education should be the last part of your resume. I have some people that take the whole first page or half a page about their degree and extra courses they had and whatever, and I still don't know what they've done or where they're working. And so that should be towards the end. You should start off your resume with a header. Well, actually, I got a slide on this, but you've got to be able to get your point across as far as what you can do, what your summary is, because you've got the first paragraph to get their attention. Okay. This is what I think sometimes when I look at some resumes. Okay, it's like Home Alone. I get a resume, and I get a lot of these resumes, so don't think it doesn't happen. There's no email address, no phone number, okay? It's in the email. Well, what if I've deleted that email? I've imported this resume into my resume database. It's a parsing system, okay? Well, a lot of HR departments, this is nothing new. This has been for the last 20 years now. Most HR departments have some kind of resume database that is not just a simple database, it's a parsing system. And if you don't have your name, address, phone number, and email, then they have to manually go put it in. Now, do you think somebody that's making $10 or $15 an hour is going to go through that trouble so that your resume will show up on top? No, they're not going to do that. Okay, so that's critical. Um, I, these email addresses, okay, these are real. They're not fake. They're not made up. Okay, I have seen some of these. A couple, I decided, no, that's a little too crude. Maybe I won't put it there. Um, just use your name, bob.langieri@gmail or whatever, so that they can find your email. Nothing embarrassing, nothing that they're going to say, oh, we better look up this person on the internet. Uh, Typing errors. Um, it amazes me that, people will take something like systems analyst and screw it up, programmer analyst and screw it up, business screw it up, but they do. And I mean, I, I make typos and spelling errors, and I'm sure we all do. But if you're going to send your resume out, spell check it again, spell check it again, then send it to somebody else, ask them to spell check it, see if the grammar looks correct, okay, and get some feedback on it. Formatting. I've seen people that have no margins on their resume, and the type is so small that I have to enlarge it in order to read it. And then I have to start putting spaces in, because if I'm going to work with this resume, I've got to separate these paragraphs, or I got to put in bullet points. These are things that you should be doing. Again, this is not fake news. Okay, this is the real world. I get resumes that it's like, I can't believe this person is making 100,000 a year and they can't write a resume. Um, and I don't expect a resume to be perfect, but I do expect it to be spelled correctly. I expect that you're going to have a decent amount of spacing. And I look at a resume as a picture, like a piece of art. There should be enough white space to make it easy enough to read. If you've got it all cramped together, okay, or you have some people will put like um, a sidebar and they put their name sideways. Yeah, Word can do that, and that's great and that's cool if you want to be real artsy, but it's not effective as far as getting your resume looked at. Um, you got to mention your hardware, software. In the technical field, hardware and software need to be near the top of your resume, because if I'm the employer and I'm looking for a JD Edwards person and I don't see JD Edwards, or I don't even see the platform, and literally I do get resumes where, what platform did you work on? It doesn't say IBM I or iSeries or AS400. So it's kind of like, I'm pretty sure he's worked on IBM I, but it doesn't say that. So I have to go put that in before I'm going to get this resume out there. So these are some of the things, some of the little gotchas that are really, really important. An employer brought this up to me recently. He goes, Bob, you sent me this resume on this guy. He says he's an AS400 programmer. He goes, well, the AS400 hasn't been around for, 15 or 18 years or something like that. And he goes, I'd like to know why he put AS400 and why he put RPG and didn't mention free format or ILE. He just put RPG. And it's like, oh, and normally I catch that stuff. But on this one, this particular employer was a firm believer that the platform is the IBM I. It's not the AS400. If it's the AS400, then that means you're not current in our technology. So think about some of those things if you're going to put a resume together. Here's a few more, do's on your resume. And this is what I was talking about: having the header, having your skills near the top, having a clear summary of your experience. And some people ask me, well, gee, do I put down all of my jobs or whatever? You don't have to. You don't want to say I've got 40 years experience in programming, because they're thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to want to talk to this guy. So you might want to say over 20 years experience. You may want to list your jobs for the last 12 to 15 years, depending on how many jobs that is. And you can say prior experience included programming in manufacturing, distribution, or retail. And it's not that relevant, but that's the way to, you might say, eliminate some of that extra garbage. You don't need all of that on your resume. There's ways to get around it. And there are people that have, send me resumes that are 8 pages long. Okay. It's too much. Um, Try to keep your fonts between 10 and 12. Personally, I like Arial, Calibri, Times New Roman. They're easier to read. And don't start getting fancy with all these, wild fonts and stuff like that. Keep it to no more than probably 2 fonts on a resume. And don't go to 3 different fonts. And I mean, don't mix Arial, and you can mix Arial and Calibri, but I wouldn't mix those with Times New Roman. Try to be consistent throughout your document. Okay. Margins, like I said, important to have white space on your resume. Uh, in today's world, jobs come open and close faster than I can blink sometimes. Sometimes they're open so long, I feel like Rip Van Winkle. And that's when you know the employer doesn't know what they're looking for. Okay. But because jobs open, the perfect job may open and be open for only a couple days or a week, you should always have a resume ready. Okay, even if you're not seriously looking, always update your resume. My rule of thumb was every January or even the week between Christmas and New Year's, use that little downtime to maybe update what you've done. Update any new skills you've added during the year. If you haven't added any new skills, then start questioning, why haven't I? Maybe I should have taken a class. Maybe now it's time to get back to ocean and go to some of the ocean meetings and so forth. But have a resume up to date. One example I'll give you, and I think I can mention the name of the company and so forth, but I had a manager I'd worked with, and he was a musician. He loved music. Him and his family, they were recording music and promoting themselves with music. Um, and he said, boy, if you ever came across a company that, was in the music industry, I would just die to do that. I came across a company that was in the music industry, Roland Instruments to make keyboards, beautiful keyboards. Um, well, I got one person in an interview and one person only because of what he told me. He was ready. I knew that this was his hot button. And when I told him that it was a music company, okay, even though it was in LA and he was in Huntington Beach, he said, Bob, you got to get me an interview. And I said, no, I will, but I think you're perfect for the job. He's still there on that job, and I think he's been there probably more than 15 years now, maybe 20. But he loved the job. Everybody in the company was a musician. Matter of fact, I think the president of the company, him and his fiance or whatever, played at Dodger Stadium. I mean, talk about having your dream job. I mean, that's like if you're into cars and you had a job working for Toyota and get to work with their race team or something like that, or a motorcycle company, and it's like, wow, I love Kawasaki's, and there's a job opening at Kawasaki. I would do anything to get in there. I mean, this is just a phenomenal opportunity. So have your resume ready at all times, okay, so that even if you've got to make some updates, you can do it pretty quickly, because some of the best jobs are come and gone really within a split second, okay. There's no such thing as newspaper ad jobs anymore. Everything is done, on the internet. Dice, Monster, Career Builder, LinkedIn, Indeed, just some of the firms. For the most part, what I have found, and I've seen the cycle, companies use an agency, companies don't want to use an agency. For the most part, all companies use an agency. Just depends on what position and depends on, what's the priority of the position, what they're looking for. The benefit, and yes, I am going to be a little prejudiced in this, okay, but a recruiter if they're working with that company and they've got some inside information on the company, the job, the manager, maybe they've got a personal connection with the hiring manager. Maybe we place the hiring manager there. And so hiring manager calls us every time he needs somebody. We're going to get you directly to the source. We're going to have really good information about the company. We might know several of the workers out of there. We can tell you the personality types. Not always, but a lot of times that is the case. So there's some benefit of doing that and going through a recruiter. I've literally had companies where they ran an ad, somebody sent their resume and never heard anything. I sent the resume in knowing that it already had been there, and the manager says, "Yeah, let's set him up for an interview." After the person was set up for an interview, he gets a phone call from HR, say, "Oh, well, we had that resume." Well, it's too late. Bob's got him in here, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning for an interview, and so they're bound to pay us the fee. We're not trying to be, sneaky or whatever, but there are some times when resumes are just sitting in HR and nothing is getting done with them. Maybe they didn't see what I saw in the resume as a match, and so maybe they put that in the rejected pile. So a recruiter, can help you. I mean, there's all kinds of recruiters out there. I mean, there are some people that are not so reputable, and then there are people that are like your best friend, and you develop a long-term relationship with them, and that's what it should be. That's the kind of person you do want to work with, and they should be your career coach, your advocate. They're going to give you the skinny on everything about the company, the good, bad, and the ugly, so you know what you're getting into. Um, Companies today do not respond if they're not interested. Okay, get over it. They used to send you a rejection letter years ago. They don't do it anymore. They haven't done it in the last 15 years. It's become very impersonal. So anytime you have a personal connection with the company, somebody at the company, maybe somebody at Ocean works for that company, and you can say, hey, I heard you work for ABC company. I'm going there for an interview next week, and I'm going to be meeting with Mark so-and-so. And they say, oh, well, that's great. Yeah, Mark's looking for this. And I go, well, do you know what Mark likes? Do you know anything in particular you can tell me about, what to bring up and get some inside information. It could be, like I said, somebody from Ocean. It could be somebody from a recruiter standpoint. It could be somebody that you've worked with years ago and you find out that they're working at that company, which brings me to another point. Okay, this is why it's important to be out there socially. LinkedIn is especially good for business. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a Facebook person. Okay, some of these other things, I mean, Twitter and Snapchat and all these other things that are out there. The only thing I care about business wise is LinkedIn. For me, LinkedIn has a lot of value for business networking. And if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn and then start accepting invitations from people you know, or invite yourself to connect with somebody. That's how it works. And if anybody needs help with that, talk to me offline. I'd be happy to tell you what I know about it. And I know very little, but you don't have to know a lot about it. But there are some great chat groups on there, or what we call LinkedIn groups, and it might be a specific group about, let's say, modern RPG, or it might be a BPIX group. Okay, there's a group for almost every discipline. There's a systems management. There's a security group. So if these are your interests, connect with those groups. Connect with some people on those groups. If you were going to go for an interview, let's say I'm going to go for an interview at Toyota, okay, and I'm trying to see, well, who do I know at Toyota? So I go to LinkedIn and I see if there's anybody that I have as a first connection. You have like a first, section, second, and third relationship type of contact. And I'll go to the first person and I'll see who he knows that's involved with the interviewing. And I'll see if there's some other people that I can maybe send out an invite and saying, hey, I'd like to connect with you and find out more about your background or your job and so on. And get to know a few people. And you might find that, oh, I used to work with John Smith at ABC Company, and they're working at Toyota. And I look them up, they connect, get a phone call or an email exchange going, and next thing you know, that you found out a lot of inside information. This is through LinkedIn, so it's important. Um, I suggest if you get on LinkedIn, occasionally make some comments about something. Maybe you have an opinion about this new feature or that IBM has, or this new programming tool that IBM is coming out with, or maybe how somebody's resolving an issue, and you say, "Oh, I had a similar issue and we did it this way." You're sharing your knowledge, you're making more contacts, you're networking, and you're broadening your exposure on LinkedIn and in the world of IBMI, the world of IT. Okay, so if you're not already involved in it, get involved in it. Uh, be wary of, there's a lot of people, marketing people, that just want to network with you to get leads. Okay, so I always look at somebody's actually in IT, or they're, when it says new, new business, or anything having to do with marketing. I just ignore them, or say no, I don't want to be contacted. And I try to stick to strictly people that are actually in IT within the IBMI arena. I've written some articles on LinkedIn. You can do that, make a comment. It's a good way to get some exposure out there. Because what happens when you're looking for a job, I guarantee you, somebody in that company is looking you up on LinkedIn. That's the first place I'm going to go, is LinkedIn, and see, what does your profile say? Where did you work? Maybe we went to the same college. Maybe we have some friends that are in common. So I want to know as much about you as possible. So get some exposure out there. It doesn't mean you've got to be have like 2,000 connections, but if you've got 4 connections, work on it. you you want to have at least 150 to 200 to 250. Connect with and follow some of the conversations by, like, John Paris, Susan Gantner, Allison, Trevor Perry, some other people. Uh, like I said, put yourself out there and get exposed to the world. And there might be topics you want to follow as well. Okay, but another thing too is always keep in touch with people that you work with. You think that when you left the company, that's it. Don't see them. Don't talk to them. Your references that you have. Gee, I don't know where John is these days. Haven't talked to him since I left the company 8 years ago. That's a big mistake. Companies close. Companies get relocated. People move from one job to another. Stay in touch with some of your coworkers, some of your mentors, especially your prior managers. Okay, keep in touch. It's a good way to be able to get a recommendation when you are looking for a job. You can say, "Hey, John, I'm looking for a job. I'm on the market. Keep me in mind if you know any good shops." And you never know. You may actually, get a lead from your old boss, or maybe your old boss may say, "I didn't know you were even looking for a job. Why don't you come get me your resume? We've got an opening for such and such, and I think you'd be perfect for it." So you want to get out there and, like I said, circulate and percolate, because it's a different world out there. You can't rely just on sitting in a cubicle, being by yourself, not interacting with other people. Um, a few interview tips I just wanted to go over briefly, and I really highly recommend that you, when you're on the job market, spend $10 or $15. Pick up a book on interview questions, what to do, how to react to some questions. Um, preparing, how to prepare for an interview. Today it's easy because everything is on the internet. You can find out everything about a company. I mean, I can look up the company, find out everything about their sales, their products, their information, locations, how long they've been in business. I can look up the person I'm supposed to interview with and look them up on LinkedIn. That's the other thing. It's reverse. Now I'm looking for a job, but I'm going to look up Eamon because he's the VP of IT for Fresh Legacy. So I want to find out as much as I can about him, where he's worked, what he's done over his years. He's involved with OSHA. I'm involved with OSHA. What a coincidence. And I'm going to connect with him before I even go for the interview. And I might even write a note. Hey, I'm coming out for an interview with you next week, Eamon, but I sure would like to connect with you and keep in touch. Eamon's not going to say no. Are you, Eamon? Okay. So keep in mind some of these things that you need to be able to do. When unemployment was pretty bad, and I knew some people out of work for quite a while. There was this program that the EOC was running. I'm trying to remember the name of the exact name of it. It was something about uh, success. I don't want to say dress for success, but it was basically for mid managers and managers to basically clean up their act, clean up their presentation, work on their resume, all these things that we're talking about. But these were a series of classes, and actually, these people that were unemployed, they would interview each other and do practice interviews. So they got better and better. And one of the things that came out of this was the 30-second elevator pitch. Okay, you got 30 seconds to tell me about you. Well, I've got 15 years in programming. I work for, IBM, and I've been doing this for the last 3 years. And now I'm looking for a job, looking for my next move into, the areas of the manufacturing industry. That's my strength. Okay, so be able to do that elevator pitch. Be able to, answer questions without being stumped. I've had people go on interviews and get some oddball question, and they say, "Gee, I didn't know how to answer that." Well, that's unfortunate because that's what the employer thought too. Well, why couldn't you come up with something, that was believable rather than just shrug your shoulders? Attire, how you dress for an interview. Today, almost every company is business casual. Okay, what does that mean when you go for an interview? For me, I guess I'm old school. I still put on a suit and tie. For ladies, one of the things, of course, I'm not a lady, so I didn't know how to dress for an interview. But they recommend women wear like either a pantsuit or some kind of a jacket and dress as or skirt, I would say. Correct me, Margaret, if I'm wrong. Okay, I need your help, but the thing is, there are ways to dress for an interview. There are ways not to dress for an interview. I had sent somebody out to an interview one time for a manager's job. He went from work and he was dressed in jeans and a polo shirt. He was interviewing with the CFO. And I'd been to the office of the CFO, okay, and they weren't a law firm. It happened to be a seafood company. That was an IBM shop. And wow, talk about a plush office in San Pedro. I mean, mahogany bookcases all around, big mahogany desk. And this person shows up in sneakers and jeans and basically a t-shirt. And he gave him about a 5-minute interview. And when I called for feedback, I had no idea. And so after that, anybody else, I remind, make sure you wear a suit, and which I normally do. But like I said, things have changed a bit today, and I still think you should dress up a little bit for an interview. Again, I'm old school. Okay. Um, Turn off your phone when you're getting out of your car. Turn off your phone. Put it on silent. You definitely don't want to have your phone going off during an interview. Okay, and you never know who you're going to meet in the lobby. And I've actually had some people go on interviews, and the president of the company or some top executive happened to be walking through the lobby at the time and just said hello to the person. Okay, later to find out, yeah, that was the president of the company. Oh, okay. So you want to make good impressions with everybody, whether it's the receptionist, even a security guard. Hi, have a nice day. Thank you. Appreciate your time. Where should I park? Any recommendation? Things like that. So keep all of these in mind. Again, I won't go through every single one of them here, but uh, uh, you know, think about some of these things before you're going on an interview. Um, Again, talking about this book of interview questions, these are some questions that I've had people get asked, or similar questions, and some people get stumped on some of these. But tell me about yourself. Okay, well, where do you start? What do they want to know? They want to know about high school. They want to know about college, my first job. How much do they want to know, and where do you start, and where do you end? Um, what do you like most and least about your last job? You got to be careful how you answer that, because what if what you like least is what they need most? Okay. Of course, you could say, well, what do you need most? Answer a question with a question. I used to go to these seminars. Zig Ziglar. Anybody heard of Zig Ziglar? Oh yeah. If Well, I don't, Zig Ziglar might actually still be doing his seminars, but Zig Ziglar was part preacher, part salesman. He could sell you anything, okay? And he always say, whenever you get a question, ask another question. And you keep asking questions so the other person gives up, okay? May not work on interviewing, but the idea is that don't be afraid to ask questions. Find out what it is they are looking for. What's the key thing that they really need on this job? But again, a book of these interview questions is really helpful. I had somebody who had told me about this was having a tough time getting a job. He had a lot of short jobs, unfortunately, because the company closed. The newest person on the block is the first one to go. And he told me about some of the questions he had on interviews. And I go, what a great answer. I go, how'd you figure that out? And he goes, I picked up this book, 101 interview, questions. And I go, really? I got to get that. Because some of these things I didn't, know or think of. And now that I've picked it up, it's like, actually, I was going to bring it tonight, but I don't want to let it go because there's a lot of good advice. I want to finish reading it. But the thing is, there's so many books out there on interview questions, how to get through an interview, that you're foolish if you don't take advantage and spend the 15 bucks, on Amazon or wherever you want to get it from. But there's a lot of books. There's a couple of good ones I recommended in my notes, one of the ones that I used. And you find answers to these kinds of questions. Okay, we're getting towards the end here, so bear with me another 5-10 minutes, and we'll take questions. But IT is all about change. We know it's what we've been talking about all night, and you have to adapt. Okay, you have to keep your career going. You should be taking classes, doing things like Ocean, things like that. Meetup groups is a new way. That's the new user group of today. Along with webinars and online training, things like that. Um, I wanted to throw this in here. Are there any people here who are actually the hiring authority? Any? Okay, so we can talk about them. All right. There are some employers, I have to tell you, some managers that do not know how to hire people. And then there's some people that have hired based on a gut feel, and it was one of the best hires I ever made. And it was the person didn't even have RPG 3. He was RPG 2. I got him into an RPG 3 shop at that time. They were AS400, okay? And what they needed was a combination of a business analyst with a little bit of programming background, but they felt, I can teach them the RPG 3 part. What I really need is the business skills. Well, this guy had been a manager, had basically done it all. It was a great hire. He worked at that company, and I'll tell you the name, Kasike Foods. He retired from that company after about 20 years of working there. And one of the nicest hires, pleasant hire. The manager who had hired him had moved on, but again, that was just, you know, perfect. Wish more managers would be like that, more open about who they're hiring instead of what we typically get right now is, well, I want the needle in the haystack. If it's not on the resume, I'm not calling you back. I mean, it's frustrating to send resumes to a company and they don't give you any feedback, but sometimes that happens. Companies need to be more open in who they hire, in terms of skill and experience, because any one of you can get hired into a shop, learn something new, and in 2 to 3 months be as productive as any other worker there. Okay? So why are they spending all these months looking for the perfect person when you might be the perfect person? Maybe not now, but you will be in 2 or 3 months. And that's another thing that you can sell on an interview too, is that I can learn this, or I'm interested in learning that. That would be phenomenal if I got an opportunity to learn that. Um, again, a couple other points about hiring and retaining that companies need to understand. They need to pay well. They need to attract people with really, good work, opportunities to learn and grow. Okay, get them involved. Listen to your employees. Uh, you, you know, um, uh, Maybe you can't always use all their ideas, but at least listen. Try to train and mentor them. Make it a team environment. There are some people, I read a great little note about uh, one of our member companies, and where Sean, one of our board members, is working, and found out he was a security guard at the company. And he got an opportunity. They needed somebody as an intern, and he never had taken a computer class. Next thing you know, he is getting some online training. He's getting some mentoring from different programmers on the staff and the manager. And they have a program where they bring interns in for 6 months. He is a programmer, used to be a security guard. Okay? That's a great opportunity to teach somebody RPG. If that can be replicated in more shops, there wouldn't be a shortage of RPG people that some companies claim that there is. But does he have JD Edwards? No. Does he have EDI? No. Can you teach him that? Yes. Okay. But that's something amazing that you can do if you've got the right environment for somebody to learn and to grow. So teach, delegate, listen, develop a team. That's what a true manager is all about. When I had a large office, actually I had a couple of offices, but it started out that I had to train somebody in my recruiting group, okay, to be the next supervisor. And then I got an override over them. And then I became assistant manager, and then became manager. As a manager of an agency, I always had my number two person in on everything we were doing in terms of advertising budget, recruiting, what we're doing, what jobs, going over statistics, getting involved in the hiring process. And I literally trained a couple of managers who then left me to work for one of our satellite agencies. So I still maintained an override over them in some cases, not all, but the idea is that's the way a manager should be: is to train your replacement, make yourself disposable. Okay, and I've actually had one guy who said, "Well, because I taught my replacement everything he needs to know, so I'm going to look for a new job." I go, "What?" I go, "Why would you do that?" He goes, "Well, I've basically done my job." He goes, "I've trained my replacement, and the company is happy, the person's happy." And he goes, "And I'm satisfied." He goes, "I'll find a job." And he did. Uh, I'll let you look at these resources online so we can move along real quick. But there's some learning resources, some online training, some ideas on the interviewing books, resume books, things like that. Some other sources where you can use this to your advantage and to enhance your career. So with that, I thank you for your time. I'm sorry I ran a little over. If anybody has any questions, we'll try and take them and answer them real quick. Any questions? Eamon, do you want to check the audio if we have any online questions?
Actually, what I'll ask is if they can just type it into the. If you can hear me, if anyone has any questions in the GoToMeeting, there's a chat window. Just type in any questions you have there.
And if not, what I can also do, anybody would like to email a question, there's an email address on the handout. I'd be more than happy, and I could probably take more time to do that. So we'd appreciate that. But again, thank you for tuning in, thank you for everybody here in Costa Mesa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
Appreciate it.
And Bob, you know, I couldn't help thinking as I was listening to this, anybody who's here who's a developer, you really need to sign up for the all-day lab on October 21st, because that'll give you an opportunity to finesse your skills to learn about service programs, RDI, SQL. Sorry, I couldn't help but